Techlandia is recorded at the Central Office on the East Side in Portland. Central Office is a one-stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com.
Welcome to the latest episode of Techlandia. My name is Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAO. And with us on this episode, we have as our guest, Edith Dorsen with the Women's Venture Capital Fund. Edith, so glad you could join us today.
Happy to be here.
So, as most of our listeners know, I like to start off each of these conversations by asking our guests to share a little bit about their professional journey. So I was wondering, Edith, if you could maybe start at the beginning and take us all the way up to present day.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I know.
All right, for sure. Well, let's see. I had certain advantages. I went to University of Pennsylvania for my undergrad and then Harvard Business School for my MBA. I am, though, I should say, a product of New York City public schools. I came from a middle-class family in Riverdale, the Bronx, and had to earn money every summer to pay for living expenses. So I worked all kinds of retail in Manhattan and have sold everything conceivable. Right out of college, I was really very lucky, very lucky. I secured a spot at McKinsey, the management consulting firm, as an analyst. And these were early days for that kind of program, and there were just 5 of us in New York. And it was absolutely a really fortuitous career launch for a young person to be able to work with and learn from such smart folks. After a couple of years at McKinsey, I left to pursue my MBA. And while up at Harvard, I actually decided to also get a Master of Public Administration from the Kennedy School of Government. 3 of my HBS classmates immediately went into venture capital upon graduating and became big successes at DFJ, Highland Capital, Greylock. In contrast, prior to launching the Women's Venture Capital Fund, I worked very briefly for a venture firm, J.H. Whitney, while in grad school. Instead, I spent a couple of summers at Salomon Brothers and then returned full-time after graduation. And while during my time on Wall Street, what I really enjoyed doing was raising equity capital, and selling public and private companies. After several years as an iBanker, I left Wall Street and took on senior business development positions in operating companies, including an educational media organization and an early internet firm, before I relocated to Portland and here started my own consulting practice, focusing on strategy and new business development. So I guess is now the good time to segue into the Women's Venture Capital Fund and tell you how
Yes,
that came
now
about?
would be a great time.
Uh,
So tell me more about Women's Venture Capital Fund. How'd it come
yeah.
about?
Yeah, well, interesting story, I think. Literally on a stopover at LAX en route to Australia, I met with a classmate from business school, and she had stumbled on the data that showed just 3% of venture capital was invested in companies that included women in senior leadership. And at that time, no one, and I really mean no one, knew this or were focused on it. And given the number of really highly competent and we believe successful women in our own networks, we were pretty astounded by that number. So we were coming up on a reunion weekend that fall at Harvard Business School, and we thought, this would be the opportune time to put together a roundtable to talk about the potential to create a fund focused on female founders who, we were learning were really being overlooked and undervalued. Harvard Business School at that time was not particularly interested in this idea. They would not give us any time, though, on the reunion calendar, on the reunion schedule, and grudgingly finally gave us a room on an early Saturday morning after late night parties and in the bowels of a building we'd never been before or since. And notwithstanding a pouring rain, as luck would have it, in Cambridge that Saturday morning, more than twice the number of women who were invited showed up. The key question, the key issue that the group focused on was there enough deal flow? And that was absolutely the right question, because while Women's Venture Capital Fund has subsequently challenged a lot of orthodoxies, I would say, in venture capital, as with most institutional funds, we review a couple of hundred companies before we greenlight a new investment. So we left that reunion weekend, we surveyed the market, and quickly concluded there was more than enough deal flow to launch our fund. So that was the easy part. Fundraising was not. I've raised money in public markets, private markets, and philanthropically, but at this juncture in time, which was sort of 2010 to 12, this was without a doubt the most challenging fundraise I've ever done. We had to do a lot of education. Very little data existed at that time to support the value of diversity in senior leadership. And candidly, there was tremendous skepticism from venture capitalists, both here locally, I will say, and nationally, as well as potential investors as to was, again, there enough deal flow and the ability of women entrepreneurs to achieve market rate returns. I will, though, I'm happy to footnote that over the next couple of years, Harvard Business School has become or became a big advocate of the Women's Venture Capital Fund.
That's great. I remember, I think we met
Yeah.
when you were heading back to a convening at Harvard Business School,
Yeah.
I think involving Sheryl Sandberg, and I was going to some random tech association conference, and we sat next to each other and started talking, and I was like, "Wow, this woman seems really impressive." And then you're like, "Wait, we're doing Women's Venture Capital Fund," and I was like, "We definitely need to talk." So
Yes.
yeah, it's interesting to see these threads and also underscore the power of networks, right? The networks you developed at Harvard and how those have kind of helped carry forward into a lot of different endeavors over the years. But that's an aside. We could probably spend a lot of time talking about that. But wanted to get back at some of your thesis and sort of the support that you were starting to see develop for the Women's Venture Capital Fund.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about like who were the early investors and how did participation in the fund grow over time?
Yeah, for sure. And I do remember that airplane ride sitting next to you very vividly. So our investors, or in the VC world, we call our investors in a fund limited partners, are mostly individuals, a few of which would be described in more recent years as family offices. And in addition, we have a couple of regional institutional investors. Our early fundraise, you won't be surprised by this, Skip, focused on the Harvard Business School network. Back east today, more recent years, our investors are clearly spread across the two coasts. Women were our first investors. I mean, literally, they put us into business. But we knew that we couldn't count ourselves as being successful until we had a large number of male investors. And today, I am pleased to share that we have about the same number of men and women as investors. And yes, the men now sit in the first couple of rows at our annual meeting.
Nice. So, in terms of shifting a little bit from investors to portfolio companies,
Yeah,
I was wondering if you could share a little bit about, what are the things you look for when you look at a potential investment, and what compelled you to invest in some of the early
yeah,
portfolio companies?
sure. Well, starting with their thesis. So, our thesis was to invest in companies that, one, included women on the senior leadership team,
Mhm.
two, were at Series A stage. And there's not, for us, that meant these were companies that had previously raised a significant seed round and were demonstrating bona fide revenue traction. So not startups per se. And 3, we were particularly interested and focused on relatively capital efficient companies. And again, back in 2013, when we really started to invest in earnest, our focus, including women in VC-backed companies, was nothing short of groundbreaking. While there were a couple of angel networks that had been established over the prior several years to focus on women entrepreneurs, no really institutional venture capital funds were. And before I go, and I'll tell you happily about some of the early investments we made, I will call out, we note that we named the fund the Women's Venture Capital Fund to quickly establish our branding. But from our very, very start, our intent was to back leadership teams that included both women and men. And so to give you a couple of examples, first, I'll start with Invoice Pay, Portland-based
Mhm.
company in the B2B payment space. It was one of our earliest investors. We passed on the investment the first time, but the CEO came back a little while later, at which point the company was demonstrating real major traction focused on one vertical. They had almost 500 customers with no attrition. And our team, our Women's Venture Capital Fund team, saw great potential to expand into new sectors, which Invoice Pay, in fact, did over the next few years. And the company was highly capital efficient, which again was a key thrust for us. And with a relatively modest amount of time to exit, achieved very high returns for their founders, their investors, and our limited partners. Should I tell you about another company or two?
Yeah,
Does that sound
definitely.
good? So Newzella, very different company in the educational space. It was an ed tech company. And well, we had sort of put out that we were or identified education as an area that we potentially wanted to invest in. We were very cautious because there were lots and lots of startups back at that point in time, but it was difficult to attain traction and scale for a number of reasons. But I observed firsthand very high teacher interest in Newzella when I attended a small ed tech conference. At that time, their offering was really quite novel. What they did is they took news and nonfiction content that was licensed from all sorts of providers around the world, and they re-leveled it to 5 different reading levels, which proved to be terrifically valuable to teachers who were quite candidly challenged working in large urban classrooms. And the company demonstrated a lot of success in getting into public schools by first selling teachers who then became their ambassadors within their own schools, then up to principals and ultimately to district administrators. And over time, Newzella has really become an iconic K through 12 brand, no matter where we go around the country, where people, it's very, very widely known, widely used, and at this juncture in the market is in acquiring other companies as the education market is consolidating for sure. I
Excellent.
think,
Well, I was wondering, you know, you've made a total of what, 17
yep,
investments across the couple of funds, and I'm wondering, like, what are some of the lessons that you've learned, the key takeaways, if you will, from that experience?
yeah. Well, many lessons. In fact, one of our VC advisors, a Seattle venture capitalist, told me early on that no matter where you've come from or whatever you've accomplished, there is a lot of OTJ, on the job learning in this business,
Mhm.
and that is certainly true. We refined our process of screening and evaluating companies, and as time went on, we focused ever more effort on assessing, evaluating the founder and her senior team. Most founders, quite candidly, are visionary, they're hardworking, and they're even often quite lovable. But only a small number really have the skill set and the temperament, we believe, to recruit and build and retain the right team around them. And knows, well, sometimes if you read, media, business media, one may think otherwise, but no successful company, none, is built on the back of the CEO alone. And the founder candidly needs to hire people who are smarter or at least more experienced than herself in many areas and delegate appropriately. And it's not an easy thing to do for a founder. And we look for founders who are dogged, who are hungry, but also who bring what we would categorize as a real humility to their role and recognize they're going to learn a hell of a lot along the way from the market, from their customers, from their competitors. So they need to be coachable. And while it isn't easy, they need to sift through what can sometimes seem like an overwhelming amount of advice to take advantage of the relevant gems from experienced advisors. And I think the other thing we learned, and that we have paid increasing attention as the number of years have gone by, and we've gone from Fund One into Fund Two, is to ensure that we're working alongside the right co-investors. So clearly, we want to co-invest with folks who have deep capital resources, but it's more than that. We really prefer investors with deep domain expertise and who have experience working specifically with management teams at early stage companies. Because what we believe and what we've experienced is it's very different. The challenges presented by those early stage companies are really very special, and they're different. They're different than those that present to large public corporations.
Well, great. I'm wondering, as we're on the topic of kind of lessons learned and trends, this, I feel like I have to mention this in every podcast these days.
Yeah,
AI. How are your portfolio companies essentially adapting to the introduction of generative AI and the
yeah,
rise of generative AI in the last couple of years?
yeah. You know, what a difference a year makes, Skip. And at our early 2024 annual meeting, McKinsey's chair of global technology was our keynote. At that time, though, there were very few examples of use cases amongst early stage companies. 18 months later, it was the favorite topic during our
Mhm.
entrepreneurial panel discussion. So, to give you some drill down and give you some specific examples, Slumberkins, which is one of our portfolio company that focuses on social emotional learning of young children. AI is playing a major role driving customer acquisition and providing customized customer service. And moreover, within the creative development part of the business, we expect the impact to be even greater going forward because AI is driving down the costs of traditional animation, which was previously been cost prohibitive, frankly, for many young companies. Very different company in our portfolio, Materna. It's a med tech device company in women's health. They're integrating AI into clinical education for both patients and providers. And they're gathering very important data during labor and delivery to try to develop a predictive algorithm to estimate how difficult a vaginal delivery may be. And another example would be Dirt, another Portland based company. Happy to say our camping app. AI adoption has significantly expanded their software development and coding capacity. I think management estimates by about 50%, and it has
Wow.
enabled them to eliminate one full-time customer service role. So pretty significant. And these are early days. And so we're expecting AI to continue and to play an ever more important part of our companies as they go forward and allow them to grow and scale without having to hire at the same rate that was previously required.
And are you seeing, in terms of how you value a particular early stage company with AI in the calculus now? Is that changing the mix where it's a company can get to a certain milestone earlier with less burn in terms of overhead related to size of the team?
Yeah. I think we will see it, but that's a little bit more going out there. And in all, candor, we have not added new portfolio companies in the last sort of 18 months. So
Yep.
I'm a little challenged in trying to respond to that. I think it's absolutely gonna happen. It's absolutely gonna
Hmm.
happen, for sure.
Yep. Yep. And shifting a little bit, with the current federal administration and sort of the national climate changing a bit around DEI, how has that impacted the fund, if at all, and the portfolio companies?
Yeah. Well, as as I have been known to say in my small circle here, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle.
Hmm.
Um, Over the last decade, investors have seen numerous examples of successful women entrepreneurs. So today, it's fairly commonly accepted wisdom, I think, in most business circles that diverse leadership builds stronger companies that simply perform better. And unlike 2013, when we launched the Women's Venture Capital Fund, there's now a great body of supporting research from many reputable sources. So, an increasing number of venture capitalists and institutional investors recognize the value, the commercial value specifically of diversity and inclusion. Still, institutional investors who really are the lifeblood of the VC industry because they provide ultimately the capital to institutional funds. They can and should do more, we believe, to exercise their clout. And we argued this back a few years ago in the Harvard Business Review. So, we're not completely where we want to be, but I think there's been demonstrable progress in the last several years, and progress begets more progress. So founders, boards, investors really should require that leadership teams harness the full range of experience, broad perspectives to confront. It's really tough to run and scale successful businesses, and
Hmm.
women would be at the table. They represent a strong return on investment. Full stop. Full stop.
Love it. And if we also look at kind of what's changed or what hasn't with
Yeah.
respect to Oregon as a climate for supporting entrepreneurs, right? You've got this interesting perspective over many years working with a lot of different founders here,
Yeah.
and elsewhere too. I mean, experience in other markets, and so, I mean, how would you say Oregon compares to, say, the Bay Area as a place to build a startup?
Well, look, I think there are certainly, you know, I think the biggest challenge we have in Oregon, of course, is the more limited availability of later stage capital. I think there's been a fair
Mhm.
amount of late stage capital, and we'll give a shout out because they deserve it. Led by what used to be called the Oregon Angel Fund, of course, more recently the Oregon Venture Fund, and others. I think that we've got a large cadre of, individual angels who have come to who direct individually and then collectively have provided a very nice seed stage environment for early stage companies. We have, I think, our greatest challenge though. I think we need to build on a concerted basis. We need to focus going forward on particular sectors. Oregon's private sector, with the support of our educational institutions, need to identify particular sectors where we've had strength, whether it's and deep experience and real human talent, whether it's chips, but where food, even healthcare, and to build out an ecosystem. I think that's what the Bay Area historically has sort of done best. And we got to pick our shots here more than we have in the past. There's certainly tremendous foundation in any one of those, and well, hopefully multiple of those,
Uh-huh.
to really do that. And I think our public sector needs to play a role here. We need to restore Portland's how shall I call it? Historically, we've had historic urban livability, which has, demonstrably slipped in recent years. And hopefully, with greater focus and some new leadership, we can restore that because, along with the region's natural, great natural attractions, I think entrepreneurs and young families want to live here.
Mhm.
And I think another advantage we have, and I know a lot has been said about the declining affordability in Portland. We all feel it. But relative to the Bay Area, we are a much lower cost venue to build a business, given their sky high salaries and home prices. So we didn't fully realize the opportunity we had some years ago, but I think we have an opportunity working together to try to capitalize on it. When I used to go around the country to meet investors to raise money, everybody wanted to know about Portland.
Yep.
And Portland was a hot place to be. And I am cautiously optimistic that together we can rebuild that and rebuild our reputation and be a magnet for that kind of entrepreneurial activity.
I love it. I love it. Are there, in your free time, like, are there any books, podcasts that you listen to that you think are worthwhile sharing with our listeners?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's see. Recently, well, I'll call out Ezra Klein's Abundance,
Hmm.
um, which really offers up a new paradigm. I think, as you know, beyond that of the left and the right, for the United States to try to accelerate economic development. And I spent almost the month of April, just this past April, in China, and came back, and I found that listening to it, reading it, that I really welcome this kind of breakthrough thinking. An older book I will call out, and one that I think you've referenced in some time past, that I think has some great application when we're sort of thinking about sort of Oregon and how do we build up an ecosystem, is the book Startup Nation,
Hmm.
which showed how a relatively tiny new country, produced more startups than what Japan, China, India. And again, I think it's the convergence, the coalition, if you would, the coalescence of national service, universities, various immigrant groups that has produced a culture there that generates and celebrates innovation and risk taking. And so another final one I will call out, which I have not read or listened to, but I know is on our book club list for early 2026, is called A Different Kind of Leadership, which is a memoir that Jacinta Arden is Jacinta Arden's memoir, and I think demonstrates she pursued a very different kind of leadership as the youngest head of state while Prime Minister of New Zealand, and particularly keen. I've heard good things about it, and particularly keen I in general, I do most of my book reading by listening,
Yeah.
but you can do either in that case, I
Yes.
believe.
Yes, that is very true. And so as we wrap up, I'm wondering, like, what are some final thoughts or words of wisdom you want to leave our listeners with? Like, what would you say to someone who says, I want to start a venture capital fund?
Okay. Well, I would say venture capital. It's my dear father, who just passed away, just a year ago, a week before Thanksgiving, would often ask me that question. And that if I knew, how much work it was, would I have undertaken it? And the answer is absolutely yes. I've done a lot of very cool things in the course of my career, but this has absolutely been, in some ways, the most work of all, but sort of the most rewarding, right? To be able to play some part in helping to launch and steward companies who are doing innovative and important things, but it's a hell of a lot of hard work. But I would say that, have loved it, and the ability to work with companies. And really, my hat goes up. Frankly, what I've done, what my team has done is, pales by comparison to what our entrepreneurs do. And they are really, I think, being an entrepreneur and founding a company is probably, I would argue, the world's best profession. But it's requires a very core, committed team that focuses relentlessly, to cross that chasm from startup to Series A. And those first few fragile years, it's all about the team. It's all about the team.
Yep.
It's all about execution, and obviously, it's the team who executes that. And so, it's particularly important to pick your partners, pick your team. But you asked me specifically about starting a fund, and I would say, in contrast with not what I did, I think it's to start a fund and lead a fund, and very important to not go it alone, which I unfortunately did go it alone. And I think it's important to pick the right partner or partners, better yet, and also the right investors. I mean, we've been very fortunate and to have a terrific cadre of investors. While we're run as an institutional fund, we candidly do call upon some of our investors who have been very keen and made, in some cases, a tremendous difference in helping us make some good decisions and being a great sounding board, and even in some cases sort of stepping in and doing the same for our portfolio companies. So we're very grateful. I mean, it took a lot for us to do what we did at the time we did it. And the only reason we've been successful is, in fact, because of those investors and the companies we invest in.
Well, Edith, I want to thank you for spending some time with us and sharing your wisdom that you've kind of acquired over the years. And I know I always appreciate our conversations, and I hope our listeners do as well.
Thank you. It's been delightful.
That's a wrap on this episode of Techlandia, the podcast, where innovation meets insight. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow us, leave a review, and share it with your fellow tech explorers. You can follow us at techoregon.org for updates and more tech-fueled content. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building the future.